Hey everyone! Today we're going to be covering the newest interface within Comfy. Yeah, I know it's taken a little while for me to get onto it, but it's really amazing. So I'm going to talk you through it, and I think it's going to be a new routine for you going forward. Also, we're going to start getting into all the amazing new Flux tools that were just released, including Inpaint. I've got some tips and tricks, and thanks as always for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Otherwise, let's get to it. All right. So initially, I was going to talk a little bit about OMN Gen. In concept, OMN Gen is super cool. Like Meta and some of the other AI image gens out there, you start with an image and you can start to give it different instructions and it'll automatically modify for you, turning night to day, some in painting, some posing, etc., etc. Great in concept. Unfortunately, once you hook it up in Comfy, it is extremely long. We're not talking seconds, we're talking minutes for each instruction to finish. On my 4090, it was literally a minute and 3/4, almost 2 minutes for a single transaction. Given that, I'm not going to talk much more about it for now. I think it needs some more fine tuning of models and etc. to get it more efficient. Very cool in concept, but we'll get more to it in the future. To start though, we're going to talk a little bit about different navigation updates to Comfy. I've been hearing from several folks that the legacy way to access navigation is starting to go away. So figured now is the best time it's ever that we all get deep into it. So got a few different items to go through here very quickly, and then we'll get into FLUX Inpainting. First, let's talk about reroutes. Initially, when we were doing reroutes, in order to kind of reshape how you're going to kind of wrap your lines, right? Either rectangle or spline, right? The curvy lines to wrap it around different areas. If you needed to navigate or make it somewhere else, you'd basically have to create additional reroutes all over the place, and then have to hook it up and then move that here and then create another reroute. And you basically create this kind of like bus type system to eventually get you to your end goal. All is good, but it was a bit of a pain. And in order to get quickly to rerouting all these lines, it became cumbersome. So the new method is really, really cool. Basically, all you do is you can even do a direct connection if you want, or you can create a reroute just as you have before. But now you just Alt, click, and drag. This automatically creates a new reroute for you. And you can see it does exactly the same thing, but you have much more control. And you can delete the reroute simply by selecting it and hitting delete. But instead of having to create individual nodes all over the place, which can get very messy, in this case, it's all included automatically. Also, if you wanted to create additional nodes, you'd have to, drag off to one of these reroutes and then create, either additional reroutes or, wherever else you want to go. Thankfully, with this new rerouting system, you just have to shift click, and any spot where you want to drag from, you can now create a new node. And so you can see, basically from shift clicking from one of your reroutes, it'll automatically create that connection to those new nodes. Also, another interesting feature that I found is what I call connection snaps. It snaps to the nodes that are closest to it that are related. So for example, this happens all the time where you'll have different samplers and different elements of your workflow. And, let's say you're rerouting to do an image to image or other sort of, post process. Well, normally you'd have to drag all the way over and kind of bring your connection along. But it's a lot smarter now. So now even if it's kind of slightly off screen, it'll know as you start to drag up towards it, you can see it automatically connects all the way at the node where it needs to. And depending on the circumstances, I've seen it snap, all the way halfway across the screen because it's the most logical place where that connection should reside. So it's pretty nifty, especially as you're quickly whipping connections all over the place to be able to connect your stuff up. You can see even if I go over here without even having to go all the way over, it's automatically trying to make that connection. Next, we're going to talk about key binding. So, obviously there's lots of different shortcuts that you can have in Comfy. And especially now with this new navigation, there's a lot of different functions that you use all the time that, of course, you could do it by click, but instead, so much easier if you have a shortcut that you've memorized that could bring up in an instant. So to get to your key bindings, you go to your settings area, And then at the very bottom here, there's a key binding area. And you can see, you can obviously search for a specific one and you'll become more comfortable with the names of them over time. But you can see any of these items that you want, you can basically assign a keystroke pattern, right? It could be anything from a particular letter. It could be, tab or control in a letter, control in a number, etc. My recommendation is to not use regular letters or numbers because I find that if you're, let's say, typing in a prompt box or something of that nature, sometimes it'll cause that kind of automatic thing to pop up and it becomes a little bit annoying because they kind of conflict with each other. So I typically recommend, using a control plus or a alt plus or a shift plus, etc. Try to avoid just using a particular letter if possible. But you can see there's a lot of different, again, options that you can keybind to. And we're going to go through several of them, at least the recommendations I've used for myself. And you can, of course, assign any combination that you'd like. But you can see, a new blank workflow is very, very helpful. Opening an existing workflow, also very, very helpful. Exporting your workflow as a JSON, I use Control S as you normally would for save. If I scroll down here a little bit more, right, we'll talk a little bit more about interrupt in a bit. Clear your queue. So let's say you have a whole bunch of kind of workflow jobs that you've set up and you realize, wow, this is not working out right. Instead of having to individually delete and kill them off from your queue, you can just use this as a quick way to kill the entire pending task queue. So bringing up the settings dialog itself, I use Control comma to bring it up really quickly. We'll talk about groups and navigation in a bit. And even the things that normally were just locked in, like bypassing and mute, now you have the ability to reassign. If you don't like Control B and Control M, you can totally redo that. So you can see a lot of these are really, really helpful. And again, we're going to go through a bunch of those. On to shortcut 3. So one of these shortcuts that we just talked about is around quickly queuing up and killing your workflow jobs. So many of you knew I was using Control Enter to automatically start a render job. Again, reminder, this is not going to help you if you've got multiple batches going. So if you need to go into your queue options and entering, a batch of 5, etc., to get all 5 to launch at the same time. But for a single render job, Control Enter is great. Now, I had been whining and moaning for a long time that there wasn't a way to kill the job automatically. And lo and behold, there is a way to do that. You hit Control Alt Enter. So if you're, let's say you have your K sampler up, right? And it's kind of doing its rendering and then you're starting to see your image and you're like, ooh, this isn't what I want. Instead of having to wait the 20 steps, 30 steps, or even 10 steps, honestly, for that matter, especially if you have control nets or other things that slow the job down, all you do is hit Control Enter and it will just stop the job right there. You can readjust your parameters and then hit Control Enter to start it up again. So it's very, very helpful. This is the go-to commands that you'll always want to use. Again, you can reassign that in that key binding area to reassign those combos, but again, very, very, very helpful. Okay, next is grouping. So we've talked in previous videos about combining groups into a group node, as well as just grouping nodes together into that kind of blue package. So I'm going to show you using keybinds, you can do that very, very quickly. So for example, with the combined groups, let's say I have 3 items that I want to just group into a group node. I select them and then I just hit, in my case, Alt-G, enter my name, and I'm done, right? Really, really simple. And then in order to break it apart, again, normally I could right click and go to, try to convert the nodes, etc. But I have a key here for Control Alt-G and they come out. So very, very quick to do this. If I want to put it together as a group again, so Alt-G. If I want to actually manage it, I just have it as G. You can assign any sort of characters. In fact, I'm violating my own rule because G could potentially be used if I'm typing in, the word garage in a prompt, it could potentially bring this up. But because it only brings up when you have selected a managed group node, then I'm pretty safe to use just the letter G to manage this group node. But really, really simple. Now, as it relates to grouping, I also assigned a keybind for Control G. So I basically select it and then hit Control G. And it's super cool. Now it does come a little bit close to the edge, as you can see, which is not totally ideal, but it's not the end of the world by any stretch. And you can actually now nest groups together. So let's say I have this all together as a full group, right? Let's say this is my control net stuff for a particular kind. Let's say I have depth control net here, and I have my, canny control net here, and I want it as a whole overall control net group. I just select everything, and then I Control G. And now I can have a group within a group. Okay, next is the console. So as you know, right, you're typically launching up a command prompt. Obviously, you can always go into the command window itself here, right, and be able to kill it as you normally would and be able to look through the logs, etc. But I find it'd be really cool to be able to have that within Comfy Space as well. And thankfully you can. And so I put a tilde as my way of bringing up an internal command window. So I can do exactly, I see the same log information as I do. I don't have to worry about bringing up the command window now at all, because I just basically hit the tilde key, and that's my key bind to bring up terminal back and forth. All right, this one's a super cool one, right? So this happens all the time where you have a pretty intense workflow kind of spanning across the screen, and you need to reconnect new items with kind of a central area, right? So really typical situation is I have a dedicated integer that I'm using for my steps number, right? Let's say I have 20 steps for my sampler. Got my sampler here. I have things connected up, and further down in the flow, I have another sampler here for 20 steps. Well, normally I'd have to come all the way back and figure out where my source is, and I'd have to then drag from there to my source, because again, if you go the opposite direction, you're going to kill any existing connections, which would be bad. So now instead, if I have my secondary flow, all I have to do is shift click and drag from that endpoint. And so what does it do? It's creating a copy of your source connection without having to redirect and trace and figure out where that source is coming from. So this is very, very helpful. Of course, you'll want to keep things organized to know, oh, was this, steps. Okay, do I have the right number of steps, right? But as long as you're doing that, being able to throw latents all over the place or bringing your model from one place to another if you're not using anything everywhere, this is extremely handy. So shift click on your kind of input for an existing connection is going to help you there. Okay, next is creating the workflow windows themselves. So I assigned a key bind to create a new blank window, being the tab key. So I can create an existing new window really easily. And you can see, obviously, as we talked about before, I can hit Control S to save my workflow. That's going to download the JSON file as we normally would, click on a save button. Additionally, if I have a new blank window, many times if you do, any sort of work in here at all, even with a basic whatever, if I want to kill it quickly, let's say this is just a junk workflow, I'm not even actually going to use it or save it. If I click it, it's going to ask me if I want to save it. Now, many times, again, sometimes you just want to junk the thing and you don't need to save it or have to worry about that extra pop-up. So if you shift click the little X up here, it'll get rid of it without prompting you to save. So especially as it comes to efficient, creating new workflows, etc., this is very handy for getting rid of them without a lot of hassle. So many times you have your favorite workflows to be able to jump to. In this case, I have my favorites over here. It's kind of stored in the ComfyUI user default workflows. This is the kind of location where your workflows are going to be located in a left navigation bar. You can always obviously click the buttons over here manually, but I have a key bind for workflows. I just hit W, and that's going to bring up my workflows. And so if I ever want to bring up my particular workflow, I can just click the workflow of my choice and it pops right up. So that's pretty handy. Additionally, let's say I have a new workflow here. I can actually go between workflows by using the control bracket left and bracket right. Again, these are all keybinds that you can specify yourself. So I'm going to just do a control bracket right, and you can see I go to my new workflow here on the right hand side. If I go control bracket left, I can go back. So you can pop between workflows very, very quickly in your Comfy space. You sometimes don't want to have all the extra stuff. You just want to maximize your Comfy workflow space. And so, if you don't need to use your monitor right now or load additional workflows, etc., let's say even you want your browser closed, so you want the maximum amount of space, there's this full focus mode. And if you hit the F key, which I've key binded, it obviously takes away that bar. If you hit F11, which is a browser reserved keystroke, you can see I have the entire screen now that I can do all comfy. So it's pretty handy, especially if you want to really focus on the most amount of workspace available, to be able to get rid of that, browser-based navigation, as well as the hitting F for the comfy specific based navigation. You get a lot of extra real estate there. One quick note before we get into inpainting, sometimes if you're working on a workflow and you get into a particular issue or error, or you just need something quickly created, you may not know where to go. And so just, we have a new service available called Offline Support Requests. You can actually check it out on the website. And you basically submit the request and we'll tackle that request for you offline. And we'll send you the workflows and other research or other materials that you need as a very quick and efficient service for you. So feel free to check it out. So that being said, we're going to now jump into FLUX Inpainting. And it's very, very cool. And I know we've had several videos around inpainting, especially FLUX Inpainting. So I would say don't get rid of your other methods. This is just yet another method for you to be able to work through, because every method is going to help you in different particular ways, right? Sometimes you just want a quick speed inpaint where you'll just basically mask and go VAE encode and then bring it into another render, right? Sometimes you need the really fancy advanced one that we've done previously. That's also a very valid technique as well. This one just came out and it's very, very effective, but not foolproof. And so you should definitely keep those other methods available at hand. But what we have done here is we have, a normal render, which we bring to a kind of scene where a guy's holding a platter here. We're going to build stuff into the platter. But first, if I look at this originally, the tie is a black tie, and I want it to be kind of a blue shimmery tie. So I basically bring it over here to this new FLUX Inpaint. Now, a couple things to note. There's a specific inpainting model that you're going to want to download. There's both a FP16 version as well as an FP8 version. Honestly, I've done some testing. I've not seen a huge difference between the two in terms of output. So you may just want to go with the FP8 because it's quicker to load as well as to get stuff through. But it is a separate model. So as you're kind of thinking through your initial render stuff, right, this is going to play a factor into what is being loaded into memory. How much time is it going to take to load this into memory and then load this to memory, or if it has to unload this first out of memory, et cetera. So, that is all part of your calculation. But once we do, this bit of inpainting, and you can see by the result, you have your blue sparkling tie, bow tie, which is great. And a couple little pieces of information about how this works, right? We're taking the mask of the bow tie, but before we just pop it into normal kind of VA encode, which we're doing a little differently this time, we're first applying a Gaussian blur mask, right? And this is really good practice in general because this is going to smooth out those lines so you don't have any sort of sharp inpainting edges that we've seen. And that's going to go into this inpaint model conditioner. Now, we've used this before in other videos. You're basically bringing in your prompt, your, any sort of negative conditioning, your VAE, I'm beaming in, and then obviously the original image and then the mask. All's good, right? Nothing totally revolutionary there. And that's going into our normal sampler, right? And we could bring this into a custom sampler as well. That might be a little faster. As we're using a Flux model to speed it up, we are using our HyperLoRa. Obviously, that's going to vary by model, but for this inpainting model, since it's using the standard dev version, this does work actually really well and very quickly. And so I can actually do this in 10 steps as opposed to 20 or 30, which is awesome. As we've said in the past, right, you can increase and lower the denoise to get you to that next step. And so here we have half our picture done, right? Because we want to have something on the plate. Seems a little silly for a butler to have a food plate without any food here. So we're going to mask this guy up, right? And from there, you would then link to a secondary inpaint. Now, you don't have to do a secondary inpaint, but since you're loading a special diffusion model here, you're going to want to do as many inpaints as you want since you already have that model in memory. If you go here to a regular model and back and forth, you have to, again, reload and unload this model from memory all the time. And so that's going to take up valuable render time and just general time, in fact. So, trying to get all of your inpaints together. So in this case, right, I'm going to just load my image up. One thing I note that actually helps when we're creating kind of like this blank space in painting is we're going to add a little bit of extra noise, right? Not a lot. And we're doing this set latent noise mask. So we're only adding noise to the masked area, which again is the cake area that we're going to add here. And when we pipe this through, right, this is coming from our model conditioning, and then that's going to go into our renderer. When you do that, again, it's going to help render some of those additional details. Again, this is also why having some of those other methods for inpainting, you just have to try which one's going to work best for you. And so as an end result, right, we have our gourmet cake here, et cetera, et cetera. And then here you can see our denoise is really, really high at 95% because we're kind of developing a lot of empty space and turning that into in-painted content. And so you can see as we rendered it out, it created a really nice cake with the Eiffel Tower, jelly beans, and the writing on the cake as well. Okay, last but not least, our bonus. So you probably saw in some of the examples here, there's a couple other noting techniques that we haven't used previously that I found out. So, you always have available the kind of standard note node. It's okay, it's worked pretty well, but I found a couple other methods that work pretty well. The best one I found so far absolutely is this label. It is by RG3, which is probably already in your node set because you're using bookmarking. But basically, if you search for label, you can then double click or go into the properties panel for these labels. And you can see immediately, first of all, you can have no background, which is awesome for labeling. You can actually specify a background if you want, but you can basically put in the hex color for your font color. So if you want, let's say, if you want this to be red instead, you can change the color of your labels, you can change the size, you could change the font, and then even, again, the background color as well. Sometimes you want, though, like a little list, though, instead of a single label. And so this Notepad Plus is also very helpful. This is by MTB, and it kind of, you could do it in HTML if you want to, but I actually like this kind of quick notation version. So if I kind of scroll over here, you can basically create bullet points very, very quickly. If I can spell, of course. You can create different sort of quick lists for a lot of different notes that you'd want to include. Obviously, you can resize this guy as needed, and then you basically hit save. Additionally, you can actually change the sizes as well. You can see this hashtag notation. So if you do #1, it makes it big, and then if you add additional ones, it reduces the size as well. So you have a lot of flexibility there as well, which is great. But this, I think, is going to be a game changer, especially if you're notating your workflows going forward. So hope this was helpful. Thank you so much, as always, for liking and subscribing and sharing with all your friends. We're almost at the 5,000 mark, so please feel free to help everyone subscribe to the channel, show everyone else what we're doing and what we're learning about. Of course, if you need training or you want to do an offline support request, please feel free to jump on the website and you can book that time as well. So hope all is well. Thank you again so much, and we will talk soon.